Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill him! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
Okay, so hey Pat, what's up?
Hey Jin.
Thank you so much for coming and like being in dialogue with me. I appreciate it. I'm very fascinated with how you've described metaphysics on different shows you've been on, and just through your own sort of, your greater work online, and what other people have said about you as well has also been very positive. And that's how sort of we connected, with someone recommended that I have you on my show. So I'm obviously really excited. I'm a little nervous, but I have actually a good icebreaker question, which is something that you mentioned on other appearances and something that we sort of touched on yesterday in speaking to you. Pat, do we begin in fire or water?
That was just a light conversation starter. Do we begin in fire or water? All right. Well, thank you for your kind words. Also, by way of stalling to think about. I was thinking about in other words, if you talk about an apple and an apple tree and an apple and a seed that's inside the apple, and you can describe each piece separately quite efficiently, quite effectively, but it's kind of impossible to distinguish some definitive line between the two, because one becomes out of the form of the other. There is no real distinction except an intellectual one between, a seed and an apple. Like one of them's got juice, yeah, okay, so you can make these broader strokes, but if you take one out, you lose the whole frame. So, do we begin in fire or do we begin in water? Is a similar question, I suppose. I think we begin in nothingness for me. And that's been the staple of...
It cut out right when you said it's a staple for me, is referring to nothingness.
So hold on one second. I think we might have to have a tech difficulty here at the 2-minute mark. I have to fix. Sorry about that.
No, don't apologize at all. It happens, and the polarities are in full force, so it's all good.
Yeah, I was able to switch over to the app version, so hopefully...
Awesome. You actually sound a lot better.
Okay, great.
You that. Okay.
All right, great.
Oh, sorry, Pat. Go ahead, and if you want to, you don't have to. I'll cut it in a way that makes you I'll make it sound like a cogent stream, but just begin anywhere that you want.
Yeah, no. Well, I think the entire snafu that just occurred is the perfect answer to the question: do we begin in fire or water? I mean, that's where I was trying to. That's where I was trying to take it. So functionally, it got there before I even had the words, which is the nature of the Ein Sof, anyways. So just as well. But yeah, no, I really do. I talk mostly about cosmology and vocabulary with people when I get to know them, and I guess by way of introduction, I should probably say a little bit about what I do and what I'm. But I guess we'll get to that. But I do talk about cosmology and vocabulary primarily, and when it comes to cosmology, I describe it as a sort of an orientation or a formula or an equation that relates three variables. One is the individual self. The second is the all, or the existential cosmos, which for most people is their neighborhoods and their local corner store, which is fine, but it's certainly more than that. And then also there is the, I guess for lack of a better term, I use the word nothing, the nothing beyond the all. And I do this to try and create this sense of sort of unachievableness by way of knowledge, because I think the greatest pitfall of the people I work with and speak with and spend time with is, and myself also, is the hypermentalism that leads us to have to first to want to know so many things, to assume that we are entitled to seek to know such things, which is oftentimes not the case for some people, and then also to have the knowledge be like a never-ending kind of itch that never produces right action. So because of all of this, I try and emphasize the cosmological frame that I come from as, having that symbol of, nothing. That is, lack of a better term, there's nothing that can be said about it. That's the whole point, including what I just said. Really putting that as the front piece of the whole thing, that really ensures you're never going to get too carried away if that's the context for learning and for knowledge. So as far as, do we start in fire or do we start in water, we start in nothing, to my mind and to my frame, and then even before, I sense like the delineated aspects of that. Probably it's that secret third thing. It's all about that secret third thing.
Well said, Pat. I obviously I agree with you. I think that I prefer to call emptiness, but
Mm,
I
mm,
understand. I've had Greg Kaminsky on. He spoke of the nothingness as well, and I also heard you say the phrase "right action," which also speaks to a more dharmic kind of worldview. And so
mm.
I think that, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I use slightly different words, but I think in a broader cosmological way that we're both speaking the same language.
Yeah, I think that's true for pretty much any occultist or esotericist who has actually explored the difficult inner places. I mean, that's, versus the ones who posture and play at the thing. We end up kind of saying a lot of the similar stuff, or at least being able to identify and understand across the language differences of our different systems. Although I will say that I would probably bring out a technical idea here, which is that you said emptiness, right?
Hmm.
So I guess I would say that emptiness, if I was to use that word, which I haven't, but if I was to apply it to my cosmology, I would give it a distinct notion from nothingness, because
Hmm.
the emptiness for me would imply a thing which is not fulfilled in its either capacity or in its means or in its, realization, actualization, emptiness. Whereas the nothingness, there is nothing to be empty. Right. But this is the whole point, is that it's all just like word soup and word salad, a bunch
Hmm.
of occultists arguing about words. You and I are talking about a similar experience of a stillness or something, right? That we've touched ourselves. So who gives a shit about the words? Who wants to argue online on
Absolutely.
Twitter threads about nonsense?
Well, I mean, you touched it perfectly. It's like there's an ineffable nature to magical experiences that
Mm,
cannot be contained in either narrative or words. Now,
mhm,
a good story contains that experience better than just adjectives, but it's still it's a little bit, it's as you said, it's untouchable, it's ineffable, it's something beyond categorization. So there's
yeah,
no point to get too caught up in the semantics of it. I absolutely agree.
yeah. It's useful in teaching. I mean, my primary vocation is around education, tangential and direct to education. So in education, right, it's important for me to know a lot of stuff because the students that I work with come from various frames. It's not important for me to know all these things because I think somehow by knowing the Buddhist phrase for this and the tantric idea of that, or the whatever, that's going to somehow give me a level up or a power up or something. It's in the simple application of a few small ideas daily that I get my spiritual power increases, right? It's not from exotic techniques and things like that. Those things come, it's useful, it can be good, but you know, mostly in education is where it's necessary to get into the word soup and the word salad and understand the ways different people talk about. Because you want to be able to build bridges effectively, you kind of have to understand the terrain of different intellectual sort of landscapes. But but people know that about me, so then they want to get intellectual with me, and I really eschew the whole thing. I don't. It's not my style. It really isn't my style. I'd rather just hang out under a tree and like tell a joke or something. It's like more fun.
Absolutely. And that the humor approach, that kind of approach of the fool, not that you're a fool, but the archetypal fool who is able to approach the tree through a joke or through even levity, you could say.
Mm.
That's a very viable magical technique, and a very it's actually a bit of a, I think, considered to be a safer way in some circles to climb the tree that way. So I agree with everything you said.
Mm.
I want you to talk about something that you mentioned about education and how that's your primary vocation, but it's also not your vocation because it's also like it's kind of your whole world, really, in many ways. So why don't you get into that and explain kind of what you do as much as you want to?
Yeah, sure, sure. Thank you. When I was a kid, I loved poetry. I read a poem by Robert Frost called Two Tramps in Mud Time. And it's this long sort of narrative poem about a guy who cuts the wood just because he loves love of the game. He doesn't get anything. He just loves chopping wood. Dude just loves chopping wood. He's got a little cabin. And these two guys that sell firewood come upon his property, and they're like gazing like hungry little badgers with their beady little eyes, thinking about how much money they're gonna make off this guy when they give him good cut profit for chopping. And in the poem, you're in the guy's head, and he's like, I spot these two suckers from a mile away. They think they can buy my work because my work is my love. And he's like, and he just gives them, he basically trolls them, and he's like, piss off, and they leave. And the last stanza of the whole poem is beautiful, and it resonated when I was a kid, and I never really gave it up. And it basically says, as two eyes do make one in sight, something something something, and then I'll make sure my avocation and my vocation become as one. That's the main point, is that the whole thing would crystallize an idea that a person should pursue his avocation and his vocation, and he should never yield his labor until such time as they have become one, the way his two eyes make one vision for him to see. And I just thought, wow, that's so powerful. And I said, I have no fucking idea what either one is for me, but I said, I don't think I should stop until they're the same thing. And that's so it is more than just a vocation. It is also an avocation. Um, but I guess that's just because I enjoy it so damn much. I love teaching and sharing ideas and helping people discover new things that are useful for them to explore life. I love troubleshooting really difficult cases. Oh my God, I did all these drugs and I got possessed by a demon. And it's not that any of this is funny. I'm laughing because I'm thinking of the person who's been through this and how they're in good shape now. But yeah, too many drugs and got a demon and tried to hurt myself in various ways, and then did all this other crazy stuff and took all these other drugs and blah blah blah. And then like I just I think that's very interesting. I wish it didn't exist, but when I meet people like that are looking for help in unconventional paths, I'm like, yeah, let's take this on, let's go. So it is a bit of an adventure, and I think I only treat it that way because I love it so damn much. Um, but yeah, I have basically crystallized some basic ideas. I've applied them in my own life, and when I was younger, to deal with a lot of difficult problems that I had, psychological and emotional and various things, physical, and they worked. And they worked so damn well that I got excited and I started sharing them with other people and trying to tell, you know how it is. You read a cool book, you tell your friends about it. So then everybody was like, "Oh yeah, that's lame. We don't want to do that stuff." And I realized that I was only playing at the thing. I was trying to build a foundation on top of sand. I had taken the fruits of a little bit of activity, and I had, as if I had climbed the whole mountain. I was trying to claim the whole prize. It made no sense. So I said, "Oh, I gotta turn all this excitement and all this drive and energy and passion that I want to bring into the outer world and bring to other people, get other people to do things." I said, I got to stop all that nonsense. So come away from the foolishness, and I got to turn all that back on myself, and I got to put myself through those paces. And I had no idea when I started that process, uh, psychologically or spiritually, where I had no way of knowing where it was going to go or how difficult it would become or what unique types of challenges I would encounter. But I knew that if I didn't do it, I would never get anyone else to pay attention either. So I set up to do that, and along the way, worked all kinds of jobs, did all kinds of things, and always was trying to provide the same, I guess, role, be in the same role for people in my life, for people that I encountered, which is kind of like a loving sort of friend, confidant, coach at times, or mentor at times, whatever. And so I started to crystallize that practice as I went through the decade plus of the shadow work, or whatever you want to call it, all the deep dives into the Qlippoth and every other damn place you can go. And then I came back and I was like, oh, wait a second, I'm actually like an organized, well-functioning, relatively charismatic and handsome character. I said, what the hell am I doing? I should be out here. So I set up shop again. I started doing the work more efficiently, more productively, and more formally, probably about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And I never made a single advertisement. I don't think I ever sent a tweet that said, "Oh, I do this thing, work with me, hire this thing, yada yada yada." But it grew. It grew every year, and word of mouth, mostly, or pretty much entirely word of mouth. And now it got so big on the West Coast that I moved out here and set up shop to, I guess, to continue teaching, but in a, a fashion that doesn't have me gallivanting all over the country and the world for months at a time. So I don't have to live out of a suitcase. So now my library's here, my books are here, and my students come to me now. And so I teach out of the place, and we go on some adventures and we travel, and we discuss cosmology and we discuss vocabulary, and we have, an experience that brings positivity to our various goals. So it's a good thing. And that's what I get up to now.
I mean, that's an incredible magician's journey right there. So if everyone, if you're looking for like the perfect container for magician's journey, Pat just told us. So thank you so much, Pat, for sharing that.
It's been my great pleasure to take the adventure, and it's an even sweeter one to share it. So thank you.
So I'll ask you a serious question.
Sure,
Although
please.
you can treat it however as conceptually as you want. There's no
Mhm.
pressure from me. But in your, we'll say, adventures in the Qlippa, do you consider it a necessary path for a working magician? Would you say that that's a must do?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
no right or wrong.
I
Just
understand the nature of the question, for sure, and where it comes from. Yeah, it comes up a lot with my students. Like sometimes, like I do not explicitly convey or teach a magical curriculum, though that is certainly a part of what will happen if people hang out with me enough time. It just comes up in various ways, but I never explicitly say, "Hey, here's how you train proper occultism." Like, here's how I just say, like, "Hey, man, sort your mind out, sort your shit out, have a good life, be good to people." Just it's simple. Those kinds of experiences, you don't need to go study into the darkness and meet all the many-headed dragons and things. You don't have to go and do all those things if you just want to have a spiritually uplifting, positive, life. Just like if you want to be a good defender of your neighborhood, you don't have to go and do Navy SEALs training either, right? You could still just be like, I run every morning and I eat healthy foods and I wake up early and you know what I mean? I do jumping jacks like in my yard and shit. And if someone comes around here, I'll call the cops and I'll get them out. But I'm armed too. I got guns. It's cool. But they don't have fucking, 50 caliber sniper rifles and shit. They're not making 3-mile shots. So it's just like that with magic. If you feel called to it, the way that I've experienced with most people that get into it and do that. Okay, on the practical answer, yeah, it's required. If we're talking about technical, like true magic in the sense of like the Western magic tradition, whatever the grimoire tradition come from the Renaissance and beforehand, do you need to be able to understand and work with the nature of the balanced forces in order to be considered a magician in that circle? Yeah, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm not making a resurgence of Renaissance demonology, right? I'm trying to like deal with the ills of the world of today's situation, which doesn't require klipa. But if someone is called into like a very special forces kind of spiritual warfare training, oftentimes it's not that they have to go buy books about Klippa or like the Klippo and just like kind of do it from an academic perspective and like summon forces. Usually they were chewed up and eaten up alive by those forces manifested through people in their lives who were tapped in unconsciously or consciously. So they've already had a firsthand experience in many respects to those kinds of forces. So they're not seeking to go after it because it's cool and edgy and I have to do it and become a badass chaos magician and blah blah. Do the sigil in my semen, like all this retarded, like whatever. Like fucking guys, chill the fuck out with all this nonsense. Stop jerking
I
off
agree.
on things. These fucking guys. We're gonna tell them, but not today. So, anyways, yeah, basically, it's not necessary. I don't believe to be in flow in a presence state with sort of exalted consciousness and mystical stuff. If you want to do battle with certain forces, you better fucking know your enemy, though. I'll say that much. I'll say that much.
Multiple things you said were profound, but one thing you're trying to sort of rectify this world, or at least your small kingdom that you've sort of built on your own, or built with all the people around you, through loving kindness, through Chesed. So I want you to tell me what does that mean to you? Do you consider that in, I don't want to say a primary sphere, but a sphere of primary importance, we shall say, just one that embodies, it's said to, as Ramek said, it embodies as 13 expressions of God in mercy. So for many Kabbalists in particular, that would infer that that's a sphere of primary expression into the tree, like through that concept. And then in Buddhism, we also have the concept of bodhicitta. So this idea of loving kindness or compassion, as it's sometimes translated, is also primary, and it is also how we do magic, and in some ways, like, or how we walk through the tree or walk through the paths. So I think that there's something really fundamental in that, in what you said, and a way to rectify that. People don't always need to go full on left-hand path just because there's a lot you can do with what I'm saying right now. Like, just if you could just work the spheres through loving kindness, I think that you can rectify a lot. I think you can do a lot with the tree just as it is, just through that concept.
Yeah, I mean, okay, if we're gonna go here, I guess let's go here. So, Nathan of Gaza produces a treatise on the twin dragons, bringing to like a more conscious domain the ideas of the Sitra Achra, the other side. He does this during Shabtai Zvi's sort of messianic episode,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe beforehand a bit. I don't know, but it's all kind of relatively around the same time. So you're talking 1650s, maybe 40s, 60s, 70s, somewhere in there. He produces this, and then a bunch of yahoos generations later read this thing, and they get all hopped up and excited, and they do a bunch of drugs, and they go into a bunch of psychic states, and they tap into a bunch of like subtle planes of energies,
Mm-hmm.
probably relating to the fixed stars, or at least the domain of the fixed stars. And they view these as like coaxial cables into sort of inverse Alice in Wonderland type worlds of pools of energies that are normally dormant when the normative functions of matter are doing what they do. But they can kind of overcome that with the mind. This is my best of my understanding. You correct me if you think this is
No,
off or something.
I think this is exactly right. I think you've even spoken about this using sort of a solar consciousness, but not necessarily solar as in the sun, but like a pristine, we would call it in Buddhism diamond thunder. So it's the single pointedness can penetrate the densities, seal the abyss, conquer the abyss, defend the fortress, and rectify the life force. So that is like with your mind. That's a
Right.
function. You can bring it there.
Right. And again, if a person is truly operating at the level at which they are truly dealing with like Briatic fucking principal forces and stuff, if they're doing all this stuff, like they should be beyond any need for remediation in terms of like, frameworks and context. You would hope, right? I mean, you would certainly hope. So anyways, the whole audience is completely mute for this point anyways, but that's neither here nor there. So with that framework established, Qlippoths, in other words, the shadow. Let's see. Here's what I learned. The hardest lesson I learned in a certain phase of my sort of growth was that the greatest loving kindness that can be bestowed is severity. This was a really hard thing for me to understand, because my instinct towards Chesed, like a sort of a nature like that, was very high, very strong, and people kept taking advantage of that, and I kept letting myself be taken advantage of because of that. And and then I started to have doubt, like, okay, well, if I'm not so soft and I get a little more firm, but what if I'm wrong? What if I'm not, I didn't have the confidence in myself, for example. So that was another phase. And then you get to the point where you're like, okay, well, is this even an efficient use of my time to like bang a drum in this person's ear, or like do some intense thing or whatever? So I came to see it as just to cut quickly with the razor blade, just immediately, and just either someone will run away or they'll come back, and then So to bring the severity into play, like, the path through Gevurah versus Yesodic stuff, like I prefer Gevurah has said. I like to kind of bounce between those two, I guess you could say. And I don't really separate. I think it's a disaster to separate them. And this is half the time I spend with good-natured guys who have become successful in the world. I'm trying to tell them that they have to be more of an asshole. I'm like, guys, stop being such a, whatever. Like, don't be so soft, because it's going to ruin all the goodness that you're trying to bring, and you're just being severe to people in the future without having to say you pulled the trigger. That's like, you're not avoiding moments of severity by being merciful all the time. You're just forwarding the severity to an unknown person in the future, because some shit's going to happen that's going to suck for somebody, because you didn't have a good foundation and firm grip on things when you had to speak your truth and speak your mind or say something hard. So like, this is the greatest mercy that can be performed. So if we take that to like the, all right, spiritual principles or whatever, we talk about these two worlds before we can even start. That's why I said that historical context framework and stuff. when we talk about the natures of the Sephiroth, and we talk about the tree, and we talk about the even like path working, less so, but still certainly, like we're so far off the mark from like what we have going on now, from what something was a long time ago. And this Qlippoths stuff, like this wasn't side by side, equal measure studied, equal measure applied by the same sages that brought down those other teachings. Like
That's
this
right.
is a post hoc. This is a so to us it's all the same. It's like, oh yeah, Kabbalah and the Qlippoths. It's like, okay, yeah, because some fucking dude wrote some Goetic magic book and like whatever, some demon, like who cares? I don't give a shit about these guys. What are the fruits of their contributions? What are the fruits, you know? So I don't know. I get passionate about it, but people don't need to be doing so many Qlippoth things. I think that's the answer.
I totally agree with you. I have said this many times. I think that a lot of the, like there's a time and a place for dipping your foot in the dark forces, or dipping your whole body sometimes maybe. But that also should come from a sort of, we'll call it a Gevuratic consciousness, where you are being discerning and you're deciding with your own will if you're going to do that, and if that is the right undertaking for you.
I completely agree, and I just want to add one more passionate point. Not this fucking, excuse my language, retarded, Yesodic, gallivanting, substance-induced, Yesodic fucking frenzies where you think everything you have is a brilliant idea. You think everything you say is changing the fucking, the Earth's tectonic plate movement. Fucking retarded, childish bullshit, and I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. So anyways, that's for, that is a subtweet. This has been a subtweet brought to you by Pat Moise.
Well, I will say that.
So somebody heard that.
Well, somebody heard that. I'm sure it will impact its intended target. So something you did say though, Pat, that I thought was really interesting, aside from agreeing with you, is that the necessity of being in balance, but understanding that it also means like being able to lean on Gevurah significantly more than I think that men are socialized to. This has been a theory of mine, is that we've been sort of pushed, specifically men or specifically mass consciousness, into Chesed overly. And it's actually poisoned some of our thinking around the concepts of loving kindness and mercy. And so we need to go a little to the fire to be able to purify that. That's kind of a more, I know that's very esoteric, very meta, but I think that that's
very practical.
I am a pragmatic. I've told you this. I'm a very pragmatic magician, if anything.
Yeah, I agree. I think I had a teacher of mine many years ago said to me something like he said, Pat, everybody thinks the Old Testament is the severe book and the New Testament is the merciful book. But then he said something after which kind of blew my mind a little bit, which was, look, in the Old Testament, the severity of the Old Testament meant you knew exactly what it was you had to do. So even if maybe it's a lot of responsibility or something, you have this very strict code that you are laid out to follow. And this is not about the Old Testament. It's not about the New Testament. This is about the idea of the appearance of mercy and the appearance of severity. He said, so in the New Testament, it's like, oh, there's just one rule, like love your neighbor as yourself, like love God and love your neighbor as yourself. So it seems so merciful, but like how much easier is it to get into trouble when you don't have that strict rule set to keep you on the straight and narrow? And so he was kind of bringing up the idea that the more merciful on the surface one, in terms of the souls that are affected by it, might be more severe in the end. And I just thought that was kind of interesting.
No, it is. It absolutely makes a complete sense to me. It makes complete sense to where you should aim. Now, obviously, I do not come from a more traditional Hebrew perspective on the tree, but
nor I.
But my first initial foundation, like how I built my sort of broader knowledge of it, was I did read Ramak. I did read Lurius. Those were sort of how I wasn't like someone who just jumped into Hermetic Kabbalah, and I've spoken on this with multiple people. But I think there is something that's a little different in medieval Kabbalah, and it is this focus on this kind of empty, I'm calling it empty again, Pat. So
no, it's
like
good. It's good.
An empty mindedness, or a single pointedness, or sort of like this pristine lightning consciousness where it's unclarified from color. Like it's turquoise, it's pristine, it's like ice.
Yeah.
And so that's how I tend to think. But I also recognize that I should be more modern than that. I should be like, okay, that's not everyone's intention. It's not the same as mine. Everyone's orientation is not the same as mine. So what I'm saying is I'm trying not to be as severe with my sort of way of explaining it, but perhaps more precise as well. So, two sides, one sword sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think all these all these distinctions become arbitrary
Absolutely.
in certain states of consciousness or whatever. But I just think there's a lot of people hanging out in like lower Yesod that think they're
Mhm.
dancing on top of a Tiferet, and I just think it's I feel like the crouchy old guy on the porch, like, oh, you kids, get out of Yesod, get up there in Tiferet, stop fucking around. But like that's how I feel, man. I don't know. We need more wizards out here.
I totally agree with you. So, why don't you give like the young guns some tips on how to be a Tifaretic wizard? Why don't you give
Oh shit.
like a little framework? You don't have to say all your secrets, but
No. There's no secrets, but yeah, it's all simple shit applied daily. But Tifaretic framework. Okay. Let's think. What's the most important thing if you want to be a Tifaretic wizard, young gun? Okay. From my perspective, I would say the most important thing to do is to kill the reflexive capacity for critical thought. In other words, we get buffeted by data 24/7. We hear a song, someone says something to us, whatever. Immediately, there's like an immediate knee-jerk critical response where we have to parse the data. We have to parse it, and it's reflexive. You got to put a space. You got to drive a wedge between that reflex. It doesn't mean stop having critical thought or something like that. It doesn't mean critical thought is bad. It means reflexive critical thought is not an ally, and it is certainly not going to help you, raise up the tree up the center if you're trying to go that way. First thing. Second thing is that, and this is like a really hard one. Again, these are just like simple ideas, but if you really internalize these simple ideas, it will open up that path for sure. Second idea, especially if you're a smart guy, this is going to be a really hard one. I'm a pretty sharp guy. I hang out with a lot of really sharp guys. This is like constantly causing, little ram horn butting between us all the time because I'm always just saying this like on a loop. But the thing I'm going to say is 95+% of what you think is just nonsense and it doesn't matter. It's not good. It's not that good. It's not that great. It just sucks and it's just not worth thinking about. Be better to have no thought for 95% of that time than have all those thoughts because that no thought is going to just rocket effects for you. And all that thinking is just going to gum up the works. Usually as a usual thing for the average person who has not yet dove into the depths. I'm not talking about someone who's been on the path for a while. They've dug pretty deep. They've hit a lot of pockets. They've broken up a lot of stuff. They've got a good system on hand. They have a daily practice. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about people who just download some PDFs because a guy on a podcast said it, read it, they get into a cult, they're like, all this stuff. I'm just like, yo, this is not it. And that's not a critique of a person or of any people. It's just the nature of the mind. It's just an observation of the nature of the mind. So the things that make you thrive and survive in the material world are not your friends if you want to experience Tifaretic consciousness. They are in the way, unfortunately. And that is a major adjustment for people that have to make oftentimes. So those two things. And then in terms of like a positive thing, really just trying to come back to like real presence. And but every time that you attempt to do that, you'll find yourself thwarted by some nervous thoughts or some nervous tick or some sudden urge to go do something, or so I have to work out, or I have to go to the gym, or I have to send that email, I have to make that call, or I have to fire off that sales pitch or whatever. All these things. If you are trying to expand your consciousness and get out of all the form of Yesod, and you're trying to get into Tiferet, so to speak, then all of that stuff, you just have to prioritize doing away with it. It just requires a dramatic leap of faith to be like, all this shit that I've been trained to rely on to get my success, all the shit that has gotten me to the position that I am, top 1% of my field, whatever. I don't care if you're talking world elite performers. I'm around world-class athletes and poker players on a regular basis. And I have these conversations with those guys. You know what I'm saying? So like some guy who just, rolled off the couch and smoked a bunch of weed yesterday and read, some Hermetic book for like 3 days, it's like, hey, this is a universal human thing. And we all have to be able to do it if you want to go that way. If you don't want to go that way, there's no need to do what I'm saying. So I'm not saying what I'm talking about is the correct thing. I'm saying if you want to get Tifaretic, you got to get away from the mind. It's the most important thing. The Tifaretic consciousness is not generally experienced with form, language, imagery, symbolism, feeling, thought, reason, sense data. Like it, so then you go, well, what's left? What's left? There's no, there is stuff left. You just haven't experienced what else is there because those things have been crowding out the data for so long. So when you start to peel them away, it first seems scary, seems vacuous, seems empty. Not to not to go back to emptiness, but it seems empty, but it's not. It's actually full, and that fullness comes in drips at the beginning. And so it's not glorifying work to pursue that path. It's very humbling. It's not gratifying in the short term in many ways. It's actually very sort of annoying and fucking, not that much fun in some ways in the short term. Completely worth it though, but it's not at first the most pleasant experience all the time. It doesn't look good on social media. It doesn't make for good content. It doesn't make for good posts. It doesn't make for good pictures. It doesn't make for good stories. It doesn't make for good party behavior. But it's worth it. All I can say is that it's worth it, and anyone who's touched it knows it's worth it too.
Well, I agree with you. Although I will admit, Pat, that I do have a slight affiliation or maybe predisposition that is a little bit inclined to what happens at Yesod, because I think there is something interesting there, and I'm one to also reject some of the other things that happen there. But I do think there's something that maybe sometimes you see it and sometimes you don't. So I think there's something a little interesting there. But I agree with you. Tifaretic consciousness is where we want to go.
Well,
So,
let me
at
add
least for the
something.
majority.
Let me add something, if I may, then to that point, because I realize now that it probably seems like I'm kind of like poo-pooing Yesod and being like Tifaret's good,
No. I didn't
but
take it like that at all.
well, no, but when someone in the audience, someone listening might have picked it up that way. But so let me just say one last thing on that, which is, for me, the way I kind of frame it with a student or something like this is they're usually in Yesod, but they don't realize it. So I'm trying to help them become aware of that nature. Then I'm trying to say, hey, there's a whole other thing. Get up there and go experience that. And then we're kind of cutting at the vines as it is. And then they get up there, and once you get up there, then we want to go back to Yesod and play with all the form that's down there. We just want Tiferet to be the one driving the chariot, not the psychological egoic self. So it's not to say like, oh, that's child's play, go up there, that's higher. It's to say we want to play with all the form. That's the point of being here, is that we have the form to play with. But we just want to make sure, right, that the compass is true north when we get in the mix. Because if we're not, we're just going to multiply problems through the layers as we reap what we sow.
I completely agree. And then actually, I think this is well, there's two ways that we can go. Is that I want to ask you how you feel about this idea of extra corporeal psychic phenomena, because I tend to treat it very non-dually. Like, yes, it's real, but all perception in a way is psychic. So again, that's very Yesodic consciousness, right? Like to treat more like, oh yeah, it's just part of my consciousness, but I have to discern the layers of what that is. And then there is this other idea that it's like a lot of people on especially esoteric Twitter, they will put a lot of emphasis on this idea that I'm special, I'm psychic, I'm star child or whatever it is. Like it's very I am. It's not really it's using a lower conscious formulation to describe something that's really non-dual, but they're using a very dualistic way to color the contour of that. I do want to ask you though, since we are on the subject of Yesod, how important would you say is a foundational daily practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's a non-negotiable. If you want to make serious progress, it's non-negotiable. Yeah, for two reasons. One, I mean, repetition is king in all arenas, so that it's just like the fastest way to do things is to repeat it, in general. But two, you're up against a tremendous inertia. If you're a person who's seeking to like go on a solitary, inner life-directed spiritual journey, whatever system you're undertaking it in, you're surrounded by people who are not doing that. So there's a tremendous gravity pull into worlds and eddies and pools of things that are not that path. So if you give yourself those day breaks, it's very common that a person a little will become a lot, both in a positive way and in a negative way. So as a person gets more established, the goal is to raise the consciousness to the point where the idea of a daily rhythm is indistinguishable from all mundane acts of life, just as you would become, a prayer would become indistinguishable from all the acts of mundane life. That's the goal. If you reach that point, okay, well, now there's a little bit more license for it to be a creative display as opposed to a sort of thing. But I mean, for me, for over 10, 12 years, I had stuff that, and it would change. I would do different things, but I always had stuff I was doing every day, psychological stuff, emotional stuff, spiritual stuff, something or other that I would try and do every day. And I think it's really important because time gets away from us. And when you're young, you're a young buck. You don't feel the urgency. I mean, I'm still relatively young, but I'm not 21 years old. Coming out of school, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed either. So it's like time gets away from us all, and it's easy to miss a tremendous amount of gains. Like imagine being able to put 0.02 Bitcoin a day away, versus like not because you're just too lazy to do something for 5 minutes. Like the gains are insane if you compound that over 10 years.
We're 100% on the same wavelength on this. I say it basically anytime that I'm asked on someone else's show or whatever it is. I say, like, I do a daily practice. I think everyone should do it, but I don't tell people what to do. I let them, they can follow their own will if they want, and or if they will it, So, but I do think it's really useful. I think it's important. I think it's part of that skill of discernment. I think it's part of the skill of, like, exactly like what you said. It's like going to the gym. Like if you are one of those people that goes to the gym every day, then you should also be like click clack motherfucker, like get grab your beads and start working on it. So yeah,
Exactly. And I just had if can I just add another little aside here that relates to this idea? Yeah, I just had a young guy, a pro fighter, real good guy. He was just here for like 2 hours. We did the sauna, we talked about some stuff, we drank some juice, took some enzymes. It was beautiful. And he was talking about wanting to like activate spiritual potency within himself. And he's like, well, there's all these different types of energies and there's all these pathways and all these techniques and stuff. And he's like trying to figure out the right one. And God bless him because he's trying to do the right thing. Like he wants to do what's best. That's his intention. But I was trying to explain to him how, there's like infinite spiritual gifts. There's infinite spiritual skills that human beings can tap into. I said, the most important thing is to understand the purpose of your soul so that you can align your development of the physical self and the psychological self and the mental self with the soul's purpose. So I said the very first and most important thing that has to take absolute priority over everything development wise is breaking that barrier between the psychological self, the ego, and the spiritual self, the soul, and getting those two brains to talk to each other, building the connections and building the strength. And how do we do that? By, and then that's a whole different conversation, more psychological in that case. But so that's what we talked about. And I think that's really true. So when people are saying like, oh, I want to level up and stuff, it's like, look, the intent can be pure and the goal can be pure and everything can be pure. But if you haven't gotten to know yourself at that deeper level, you could really cause a lot of hardship for yourself in the future. It's really just about trying to save time, because if you make a few mistakes, in other words, you only have enough time in life if you're very active and robust down metaphysical lines for like one or two big mistakes, because the karma, if you're dealing with spiritual forces, is so great. It takes so much time and energy to resolve those things if it happens, that you really only have enough time for one or two if you want to do something big, because you need all the energy and force aligned to just one end goal for like many, many decades in order to do something big. So it's all about the time efficiency and the time factor when it comes down to it. And that's really more of a physics thing than a morality thing. But they're both related, I think.
I think you've made a great case for this, like just in our conversation, like the unification of what we would call like the three realities in tantric Buddhism, like inner, outer, secret. This kind of like you are present in all three sort of states or worlds. You could even say like the trikayas, like the three world system. You could say that you're present in all of those worlds, doing the action at all three levels all at the same time. There's like an element of unification, but it's also ness. So I think that that's a really interesting thing that you talked about. But then also this idea of time and how specifically if you want to assign it to Saturn, or maybe you could say even Binah, then there's a lot of negative perceptions of that sphere, of that planet, of that that outer density at least. So what in your opinion, Pat, is the relationship that it doesn't have to be a magician, but like you're saying, like everyone is a magician in their own way, because the way you live your life is your greatest magical operation. I think that you and I both agree on that.
Yeah.
And so, what is the proper relationship? We'll call them a magician on the path, but it could just be a life path. What does that look like, and how should we conceptualize of it?
Sorry, relationship between what? The time factor and the
Like,
magician?
what is time, and what should our kind of perspective on what time is be? Like, should it be this governing force that structures our lives? Do we think of it more conceptually, more maybe loosely, you could say?
Ah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay, okay. Yeah, this is very interesting. I guess I would say time is the antecedent of rhythm, right? It simply is the necessary factor that allows for rhythm to exist. So it can be contextualized as a negative force, as it has been done in some times and ages and peoples, or it can be done as a more positive force, I suppose. I guess it's immaterial to me, the narrative myth around it. It's more of like it's one of those functional. It's like an abyss. It's like a time is a mini abyss, right? Uh, Now we're into Das and the ideas of Dot, I guess. So let's say the tree. Let's take the tree for a second before we talk about time, so we can link these things in some kind of structure. Or I'll just like share a structure that I like or something.
I love the tree. So it's often a map, an ontological and cosmological map that I use. So please feel free to go ahead and do that.
Okay, sure. So I would just say simply maybe we take Malchut and we say earthly consciousness, bodily consciousness, maybe something like this. Then we go Yesod brings in the mental side. So all psychism, all of that we can say is sort of Yesodic. Anything form based with psychism is Yesodic there. That kind of, I would say, claircognizance is kind of this Venn diagram circle that abuts between Tiferet and Yesod. So like the highest reaches of Yesod will be a claircognizance where there's not as like much form. Like you don't see a cheesecloth, an image of a cheesecloth, but you can describe something to someone just by knowing it. Something like this could be Yesodic, but also Tifaretic. That's how the soul can kind of speak to us through the claircognizance of just like, I just know this suddenly. I just know that. So that's somewhere in there. And so Yesod is the form. And then Tiferet is this transcendence, for lack of a better term, is this transcendent function that we have, not to be confused with Jung's transcendent function, though that is, I think, brought to bear through Tifaretic means in some cases. But transcendent function here just meaning beyond the five senses, basically, beyond all that stuff, and including the psychic five senses as well, Tifaretic. And then there still is an element of time, but I think you can weave, if you're planting seeds in Tiferet, you can harvest out. So there is no harvest season. It's always harvest season. So you can create tremendous synchronicities in the future for yourself by moving with others in a Tiferetic sort of radio station. You dial it to Tiferet, so to speak. Then you're moving with people. If you stay for many years in Tiferet, those things you do with some people that are just random whatever's things that happen will bear fruit in crazy ways in future in alignment with what you're seeking to achieve. This is a great secret of saving time through the Tifaretic means, even though at the beginning it seems to take longer to plumb the depths to get there, but totally worth it on what you gain by being able to tap into that faculty. Okay, so that's Tifaretic. So that's also, I would say, more on the transpersonal sphere. That's more like human beings interacting with human beings interacting with energies and things like that. Then okay, that gives way to like a different rhythm, because now you're able to go back to Yesod with the Tifaretic frame and tie all that together, and it becomes as one. It's one unified solar lunar astral light. It's not like two separate compartments. It just becomes like one. It always is one thing, but we can see it as one thing. Okay, once that becomes one thing, that's like the fire water giving birth to steam. That's that Das. This is like a meta, and anyone who's tapped that, there's nothing we can say. So if you know, you know. That's we leave it at that. And then this Das idea gives way into some type of experiential sort of unity Trinitarian principle, not Christian, just simply the one, the two, the three, or the zero, the one, the two. We could say like that also, maybe better. And then you get into that box and there's a meta. So I like to call Da, I say there's like a Das in the supernal triad. There's like a little speck in the center. So this is symbolic language. It doesn't matter. It's not literal. So it's obviously not actually like this, but let's just say you have the crown, you come down, you get the two. Until the three, it's an open. Now it's closed. Now the three creates a closed plane. So in that closed plane, there's the capacity for self-reflective self-knowledge, or self-knowledge through self-reflection, which is the sort of the Godhead, let's say, gaining that fourth, that meta. But it's a meta. It's contained in a mental way to the Godhead. It's not like concretized in any type of way. It's pure. It's a pure meta. And then that diotic thing, like that's inside the supernal, bleeds out, so it drops down, and that's why it sits on the boundary on the path between. Was that the Empress? I think, right, or the High Priestess? I forget now.
Yes, I believe it. I think you are right though.
I think it's the Emperor. So, anyways, so now the das would be placed as a circle with half the circle above, which puts it inside the supernal triad, half the circle below, which puts it beyond the outside. So this is like a very important distinction. And then somehow there's a functional connection between the meta that is gained by the Godhead, represented by the idea of das in a spiritual, in the highest way possible, absolutian, whatever, and then that notion precipitates the impulse for the Godhead to send out ahead of the folding lightning bolt before it's going to unfold. It sends out through this diotic aspect through the backside of the tree and anchors itself some type of foundation. Oh, look, whoa, wow, that word is there. That's so strange. It anchors itself a foundation, and then the lightning bolt comes and it hits it. So it's like throwing a pass to itself, if this makes sense. Um, and this creates a loop or like a circuit that runs from the front side of the tree to the back side of the tree, from Yesod to Das and back. And this loop has a lot to do with the shadow or the tunnel working and all this craziness of the modern left-hand guys, and also the practical natures of the left-hand stuff from the old times as well. I think this is a really key idea if it's applied with the right. If you have the other pieces, this is like a key ingredient. I think it's not the whole equation, but I'll probably leave that at that. I don't want to go too far on that anymore.
I think you described it beautifully. I've always described Binah and Hokmah as being they have their own mirror of dialectical unity as well, and that happens in obviously God knowledge. So there's something also there where it's like wisdom science. It's partly experiential. It's partly text based. There's something that you're applying the knowledge and you're building upon it, and you call down the lightning strike or you ride up the lightning strike. So yeah, absolutely. I think exactly what you said. And just to throw in a little Sefer Yetzirah,
Yeah.
it's interesting that Pluto is said to have like that same rotation that is like Newton's ball, like that are the perpetual motion balls that you see. Yeah. So Pluto has that thing, and I've often thought, well, Pluto is the most similar. That's what I would call Dath. This is my personal sort of framework I think of it as, but I mean, there's something there. There's something like it breaks all the Qlippoths that were, and then you have it coming back and sort of it comes in and out. It's there and it's not there. It's relative and it's primordial at the same time. It's like what the truth really is.
Yeah, and Kenneth Grant's outfit. So Kenneth Grant was one of the last students of Crowley, and then he was pushing the edge on pure Crowleyism in the OTO, and then they made him call it something different. He formed the Order Typhonus, and then that was sort of a magical working group with all these specialties. But he himself. Sorry, I just had a truck go by. I got a little distracted there.
Oh no, that's okay.
What were you? What was the point that you had made? Because Kenneth Grant makes the same point. I just wanted to tie it together.
I try to think of the tree as not clockwork. I know some people have used that sort of framing. I try and think of it though as a flux. It's dynamic. It's not a fixed system, especially for you could say the top four spheres. I know I'm saying 4, 3, but I try and think of it as more of especially those 3 are not fixed necessarily in place. Like they have different attributes that can be sort of expressed differently at different times, at different astrological ages.
Sorry, I remember the thing. It was Pluto that you said about Pluto. So what they talk explicitly about driving towards the Trans-Plutonian energies, and Tracy Twyman in her work explicitly talked about the Trans-Uranian energies in her book, the fiction she did right before she died, Genuflect. She talks about, she has the cult framed up all well there, and they're seeking this. So they connect the fixed stars to this idea of a trans-Plutonian or trans outer planet, but Pluto being the outer cap, right, of the whole thing, to the path working, or excuse me, to the tunnel working, to the fixed stars, and they have like a whole cohesive system for it that they built up. And they love that friggin' spider. They love to do stuff with the spider, the webs, the weaving webs, all that stuff.
So it's interesting you bring up Tracy because I have a series about her that's continuing. I've actually done episode on genuflect that
I
has
didn't realize I studied her work extensively for like 9 months, and I helped her co-author with his next book afterwards. Yeah, in
oh,
some
really
small in some small ways.
I didn't know this. Okay, so that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But no, so I looked at her work very speculatively. I didn't necessarily. It wasn't like we like when I had both Zachs on to as my co-host, they sort of presented it, and then we would discuss it, like how you and I are discussing Kabbalistic ideas. Like I would sort of pause them, and
Mhm.
I would say, okay, I think this is an interesting passage, or this is an interesting way to frame it. From as a magician's perspective, I would look at it like this, like maybe she's talking about this, not really the outer story. So that's how I treated it. And then obviously the idea of plus ultra is very interesting. It's sort of speculative ontology, very NRX, very
Mhm.
right? Like it's like
Yeah.
this broader thing that magicians are real, magicians play a part in politics, magicians play a part in the world. So that's obviously very interesting to me personally. So but then I that's sort of what I looked at in the broader series. But so it's really interesting that you brought it up. So thank you. Good promo for that episode, genuflect.
There you
And
go. And ironically, this what we talked about yesterday, that tower that I wanted to tell you about, that magical tower that exists.
yes, and Newport Tower.
So the only way I found out about that, despite the fact that I worked across the street from it for many years and sat at it for many years, had no idea what it was that Tracy had come to a point in her research where she felt fairly certain we were in some kind of a simulated system, like a Saturn cube matrix or some sort of thing.
Mhm.
And I think she, there's a lot that can be said about where her mind was at, but I have tremendous respect for her work and her research and the way she brought herself forward in the world, despite her many sort of dalliances with the left hand path stuff. But anyways, she interviewed the curator of the museum because she was convinced that John Dee had constructed it as like some kind of chip or something inside the simulation, and she may have been onto something there. So time will tell that, but. Yeah, that was the only reason I found out about that tower, the Newport Tower I told you about, was because I was studying her interviews, which all now have all been scrubbed, but I watched them all like, 10 times each or something over the course of 6 months, 7 months. And one of the ones that she was interviewing another guy, and I was like, oh, I was going to skip it. And I was like, wait, I know that tower. And I watched the damn thing, and the friggin' guy, I've met the guy before. So I went to see him, and we became friends. He became a mentor of mine, and I learned all of his research about the tower for many years. I bought all of his books. I think I'm the only person in the world with all of his books. That's what he said. I have like all 22 of them. It's like a long series he wrote over the course of 25 years or something.
I mean, that's an incredible story. It was such an funny, I will say, fortuitous coincidence in a way, because I'm trying to schedule with Alex right now, but it's like her work sort of opened up a whole new world for me, like a whole new way to sort of deal with reality. Not that obviously I'm Buddhist, I like Buddhism. I'm very happy with Vajrayana and Tantra and just more broadly, but her work and specifically has sort of made me even look at parapolitics and conspiracy like very differently than I
Yeah.
did like 3 years ago.
Yeah, her effect is hard to overstate. And of course, Alex has his own track and his own knowledge. He was brought in. I mean, he and I became quite close, actually, quite good friends, you could say, in the wake of connecting after she had passed. And we had many long and interesting conversations about all kinds of stuff. So he has his own knowledge base and his own stuff. But she really was out there grinding as well in the public arena in a very special way. And I think, I think history will judge her kindly. Is my theory.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I think that in general, like her ideas are very radical, and maybe you could say they're trans-Uranian in their own way. But that's not, sometimes you need a little bit of that energy, that we say the pink ray. You need just to clarify what things really are, what things
Yeah.
really mean. So, yeah, I totally agree with that, and I'm so glad you brought that up. Well, why don't you? So we've had a quite in depth. I've pushed you a lot, but I mean, you are up for it. I know that you can handle
Oh
this.
yeah, let's
Like
go. This
way,
was this was just a fun. Yeah.
but okay. Why don't you talk about Newport Tower a little bit and just give like a preview if you want to? Obviously, you're always welcome back
Oh
on, but if you want
gosh.
to come
Yeah.
back
Okay.
and talk about
Sure.
Newport Tower, just give people a preview of what that is, because I had heard of it, but it's just very faint in my memory.
Okay. All right. So I have a bias when I tell this account, so I'll just let that be known. But basically, there is a very old tower. It's the oldest stone-built structure in continental North America. that still stands complete like this. And no one really knew. So it was in Rhode Island, and the first governor of Rhode Island, he owned the land that it was on, and in his will, he deeds the tower to his daughter. So from the very beginning of the founding of the country, the colonies being formed in the early, nascent America, the very first governor of the state of Rhode Island was in possession of this tower, and he calls it his stone-built windmill. But obviously, there's nothing windmill-ish about it. It's the least windmill-like tower or structure you've ever seen, and everyone knows that in today's age. So everyone began trying to figure out what it was. Now, Longfellow, the poet, came to Rhode Island on a trip at one point, and he rode a horse along the beach. And at that time, there was no housing development, so from the beach you could see up the hill, and at the top of the hill there was this beautiful stone tower. And he just fancifully created a made-up fiction story in his head about some Vikings that came and built the tower. And by the time he finished his horse ride, he had conceived a whole poem about the tower. And he wrote the tower as a fiction. He wasn't saying it was real. He never intended for it to be taken real. He's on record having said that it was not, that he made it up. He was in an interview in a newspaper. Anyways, the story became so popular, the poem became so popular, it codified the whole thing. And now in that place in Rhode Island, everything's called like the Viking Hotel and the Viking this and the Viking that, and the high school team is the Vikings and all this, all from this poem that this guy wrote. And so it was settled science. Everyone was certain that it's just a Viking tower and blah, blah, blah. And then came people who had Templar theories, Chinese theories, all these different theories about who came and who built it. But there was a professor at University of Rhode Island who was a professor of astronomy, and he said to a young guy named Jim Egan, who's now the curator of the museum next to the tower, he said that this young guy was a photographer at the time, professional photographer. He said, Jim, if you go there on this night, you're going to see the moon through two windows. So let me describe the tower. It is a circular cylindrical tower. It has, I believe, 8 pilasters, bases with archways in between them, small archways. And then it goes up, and say the pillars are maybe, 18 feet tall. And then the rest of the tower is another like 24 feet tall, let's say. And it used to have floors, and there were like different floors to it and all this wood stuff, but now it's just stone. And in the tower, there are 3 windows around the outside, somewhat evenly spaced apart. They're not perfectly like a third, but it's 3 spread out windows. And so Jim Egan, this young guy, photographer, is talking to his buddy, Professor William Penhallow at the University of Rhode Island. And Penhallow says to him, listen, if you go and you stand in this spot of the park and you look this way, you will see the moon through those 2 towers. It happens every 19.8 years. I saw it last time. They call it the lunar apogee, I think. And Jim was like, no way, man, that's crazy. So he got his equipment, freezing cold. It was snowing out. It was wintertime. And he got the picture. And then sure enough, the moon goes right through the window. So he went back to the professor. He said, how the hell did you know that? And how the hell did they build that? What is that tower? Guy said, no one knows what it is, but I tell you what it does. It's a horologium. It's a timekeeping, date-keeping device. It's a camera obscura. So it acts like a pinhole camera. Renaissance horologium, clock and day keeping device, and it perfectly aligns the rhythms of the stars to its structure so that it's almost one with the movement of the stars, basically. And so for however many hundreds of years this thing has been around, every single solstice and every single equinox, if you go stand in the park at one place and look through the 2 windows, you'll see the sun on the day of the solstices. If you go into a different place and look through 2 other windows in a different direction from the opposite side, you'll see the sun in the equinox. You can see Polaris through another 2 windows every certain time period that always shows up through there. You see the lunar apogee. And there's so much more about it than this. So at the time, Jim just simply took this one picture, got entranced by the structure, started studying it, and really just kind of became obsessed with it in a way. I think he'd say that himself. He just really became full on obsessed with trying to understand what it was. So he starts doing research on history and stuff, and he finds out that, he found out a lot of things, but he found out that there was John Dee, when he was advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, he found out that she sent an expedition of like masons and builders and stuff to the New World to build a tower or build a structure in order to take possession of the land of North America. So at this time in history, this is the Renaissance era, Elizabeth I. Dee is her advisor. He's like a magician, a wizard. Our crowd all knows Dee. So he comes in. He says, "Look, Lizzie, the Spanish are kicking our ass over there. They got settlements in Florida and all this stuff." He's like, "We got to get some ships over there." So Dee goes to Mercator, his buddy, and says, "Hey, Mercator, what's up? I need a perfect place to build an outpost for the British Empire and the New World. Mercator says, yo, I got you, bro. There's this bay. It's 25 leagues long. There's a massive island in front of it. It's protected from the ocean. It's super deep, really rich land. This is Narragansett Bay. This is where I grew up racing sailboats on this bay. It used to be called the John D. Bay and River in our old maps of our state. So they got named after him because of this expedition I'm about to tell you about. So D says to Liz, like, we got to go. I know the perfect spot. And I'm going to build a tower there that's going to be a symbol of the new world. And it's going to usher in the coming of the Messiah. And they were messianic accelerationists, basically. They were trying to accelerate the coming of Mashiach, so to speak, like, and bring the world into like a good pitch and like get free from all this political strife warfare and let like good ideas reign and just be able to troll and make frog memes and study, occultism and not get your head chopped off, have free speech and all that stuff, right? That's the whole thing. So they came to do it. And they sent all these people, and Sir Humphrey Gilbert, this one guy, he gets the deed to North America. He splits it with D, gives D half of Canada. He's like, yo, bro, I'll hook you up with Canada, dude. He's like, cool. They go over, but unfortunately, on their way back, they come for like 1 year. They build all this stuff. On their way, they get stuck. They go. That's how Newfoundland became part of the British Empire. They were on their way to build the tower, and they got waylaid, and they stopped in Newfoundland, and that's why Newfoundland's part of the British Empire. There's a statue that says Sir Humphrey Gilbert came here in 58. So that's the expedition that this Jim Egan, this museum curator, theorizes. And he's got books these documentation on this stuff is fantastic. But his theory is that they came to build it. Now, these were all like the Rosicrucian inner circle dudes. So it makes sense that they would have been able to build something like this and that they would have empowered it in some spiritual way to be a symbol of the new world. I mean, that's literally what it was supposed to be, I believe. Now, you can also take the line that D was a black occultist and all this was demonic magic. Okay, whatever. Well, that's another show. But like, he was involved probably in this. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If you take the hieroglyphic monad and you take the blueprints of the building and you put it on 2D on paper and you put them over each other, you'll be amazed at what happens. It's a really remarkable thing. All in his books, he does all this stuff. He gave his own translation of the Monas Hieroglyphica, relating to the structure of the building and how it relates to the secrets of nature. He's also like well versed in Buckminster Fuller's mathematics. This is all the Jim Egan, the museum curator, and he's taken great pains to preserve all of his many discoveries and all of his knowledge about all this stuff. But he himself is not a magician, nor is he an occultist, nor is he an esotericist, nor is he a Mason or any other type of occult fraternity. And he kind of doesn't really like when people who have occult backgrounds try and read into this stuff. He's very protective of what he's come up with. And I think that's fair because he dedicated his life to figure it out. But I think there's a lot of room for extra discoveries if a bunch of occultists were to like look at that stuff and like start digging in. I think there'd be an awful lot of juicy tidbits to start pulling out probably for all of us. So that's enough about the tower, but that's the idea.
Well, I mean, I knew, Pat, that you're an incredible storyteller and that if I, just give you something, you're able to go off on your own, you're able to weave your own story with it. So I really appreciate that. And I hope that you will come on and maybe we'll get Robbie or Nick on both. They would fucking love that. Like they would. I do. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you so much, Pat, for coming on and just, I think I was nervous because I do know how much knowledge you have, and sometimes perhaps I'm not as precise as I could be, and I should be. But so I appreciate you for being extending me grace and flexibility to sort of.
Oh, not at all, man. This was great. I thank you for like getting out there in the trenches and having the sweat on your brow and the dust in your eyes, and doing the thing, because I always love talking and sharing ideas, and everyone always says, oh, you should do a thing and do this. And I'm like, yeah, but I got like 80 million things I got to do. It's like, it's hard, but being able to come in a environment you curated with the right kind of people is a gift and a blessing. And I enjoyed our conversation very much. So thank you very much. And to anyone who stayed through the whole thing, thanks for listening too.
Absolutely. Well, people are gonna stay because you're cool and just like you bring your own thing. So, if you have anything you want to plug, Pat, please.
Oh yeah, sure. Let me plug myself. Yeah, so I am like a coach, educator, teacher, mentor, trainer. I don't really know. It doesn't really matter. I have a really great specialized knowledge set for people who want to do epic shit. That's basically the bottom line. If spiritually, mentally, physically. I run a place here in Vegas. It's kind of like Fight Club style. Like there's no website. It's down to, if you get it, you get it. That's the vibe I'm trying to curate. So I lose a lot because of that. People always say, "Oh, make it this, make it that, and put the curtains up and put the website up." I said, "No, man. I want the people who get it as it is. You know, we can put curtains up together later. So if you're into cool shit and you like magical things and you want to have a cool mystical adventure and experience, learn a bunch of really interesting things about topics you're into and some new stuff too. I kind of curate experiences like that. I work with people regularly if they're going through something difficult, a certain problem or grappling with a certain issue. And I would say most people who work with me would say it's a very effective thing and very worth it to employ my services. So if any of that rings a bell, shoot me a DM. I am Real Pat Moise on Twitter. And if you want to learn more about where my head's at, the way I look at the world and the way I see things, I synthesize the most important parts of my learning in a series of threads that are pinned on my Twitter profile. So those are just there for people to read if they want to.
Well, so everything will be in the show notes. And thank you again, Pat. And yeah, fucking awesome. Can't wait for to learn more about Newport Tower. And yeah, I mean, Templars in control.
Templars in control. Let's fucking go. Oh, by the way, I also have a website, which is East of Eden Coaching. So that's my personal thing. I'm scaling to be more institutional here in Vegas, but also you can get the cut of my jib over there too. So eastofedencoaching.com. If you want to throw that in the show notes, it'd be great.
Absolutely. Okay. So
Thanks, brother.
Pat, and have a great night. And thanks for rescheduling this. Appreciate it a lot.
Thanks, Jin. Thank you. Peace.